I will try to give you as much information as seems like the appropriate amount for your low blood sugar levels. And we can certainly revisit these topics in the future. But a few things that I wanted to do were just to introduce some concepts that we've heard talked about in some of, especially in some of our master plan joint work sessions and work sessions, that I wanted to just start planting some seeds with you. These are really big and sort of complex topics, so better to give little bits at a time, I think, than try to just inundate you with all kinds of facts and figures and detailed information. But when it seems like the appropriate time to dig into this stuff a little bit more, at least you'll have a little foundation for that. So, so what we're going to talk about today is the master plan and some of its connections to two things: water and wastewater demand and capacities, and our buildable land inventory, or how many potentially developable lots we feel are sort of out there in the county, and how we calculate that. I'm going to ask Brenda Denny to join me at the table here. She's going to dig into the water and wastewater demand and capacities portion of this. But just to sort of frame our context a little bit here. So I have these three items, and really this is less of a hierarchy that this flow chart suggests, and there should be two directional arrows connecting these things together, and I'll tell you why. So the master plan and the comprehensive plans from a real high level is what's establishing our land use designations, and then flowing from that, the zoning that we have inside and outside of our growth areas. In theory, then, our water and wastewater plans should be built on what we're planning for development-wise, and our buildable land inventory should be calculating things based on what we've got planned as well. But I just want to point out that the water and wastewater plans, sometimes the master plan or the comprehensive plans are based on what our limitations are in our water and wastewater systems. And so you'll hear a little bit more about that, but I wanted to just establish that kind of at the outset, that one doesn't necessarily flow exclusively to the other or vice versa. So that's why understanding what our capacities and our demands are in our public water and sewer systems currently are, or could be in the future, are important to informing what we talk about in the master plan. They could drive what our possibilities are, or they could reflect what our plan development is. Okay. And then the buildable land inventory, that's a little bit more of a defined number, and that is based on our existing zoning, which is based off of our comprehensive plans. But one thing that we'll talk about when I describe what that buildable land inventory is that we don't currently have calculations for our future land use, our designated land use. So that's something we might want to explore to help us get a handle on what we're talking about in terms of potential development based on our plans. Okay, so that's sort of the big context here. I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to talk a little bit about what our public water and wastewater capacity currently is, and what some of the limitations on those systems may be.
Good morning. So as Daphne said, theoretically, you know, you're going to have, this is the plan that you want, and you're going to have water and sewer plans to accommodate that growth. But as she also said, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes you're limited by various different factors that could affect whether you can provide the wastewater capacity or the water supply capacity to meet the demand that you project based on your future land use. So there are, you know, first I wanted to start off by just giving you like some examples of some of those factors.
Excuse me, Brent, I don't think your mic's on.
It says it's on.
Is it?
Gotta lift it up a little bit, maybe.
There you go. Okay.
So, can you hear me now?
It's better.
For water, a good example of a potential limitation is whether or not you can get more water allocated to you by the state. And what that means is, you know, you have, the state will permit a certain amount of water to a municipal system, water supply system, and it's based on a number of different factors, including how much land the municipality has within their control for the water to be recharged for groundwater system. So, you know, most of our systems in the county are groundwater based. We do have a few that draw from surface water, but in order to replenish that groundwater, you know, when it rains, the water recharges that groundwater through the ground, right? So you need to have enough land in order to be recharging in the amount that you're using. That's very basic, but that's kind of how the state looks at it. So they won't give you more water than they feel that you have within your control. You know, so you can't just go out, you know, a couple miles away from town on a property that has nothing to do with the municipality and just assume that you can use water that they would have available to them. So that's one of the limiting factors, is making sure that you can get more water from the state. Okay, it's not whether it's there or not, but whether you can get it from the state. On the sewer side, some examples of potential limitations are the design capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. So the wastewater treatment plant is designed to treat a certain amount of sewage, and in some cases, those plants can be expanded. In other cases, they cannot, because they have site limitations or property ownership constraints. Okay, permitted capacity could be another constraint. You may be able to expand, but for some reason or another, the state may not be willing to increase your permitted capacity. And that could be because of water quality issues or, you know, any number of things, right? The Bay nutrient caps is another example. So back in 2010, the Environmental Protection Agency set limits for the Chesapeake Bay for nitrogen and phosphorus, and said this is the amount that the bay can take in terms of those two pollutants and still stay within water quality standards. If you're not within that limit, you have to do all these different things in order to get those pollutants down, right? Which is a lot of what we do with our stormwater permit, the MPDES permit, right? But those same limits apply on wastewater treatment, not just stormwater. So each plant has a cap on either nitrogen or phosphorus, and so they cannot, you know, take in any more sewage to be treated than whatever that limit is. So some of them are well under that, and that's not going to be an issue, but there could be somewhere if you can't treat, you know, beyond whatever that cap is set by the federal and state government, then you can't take more into the system. You can't accommodate more growth. So those are some examples of things that could be limitations on your water and wastewater. And then, of course, when we're looking at this, you're always going to be sort of looking at it at a point in time, right? So, for example, our current water and sewer plan is 2023. So if you're looking at what we currently have available, you're going to look at what's the demand for the future, and what capacity do you have to be able to accommodate that demand in the future. And like I said, it's going to be based on a point in time. So you're going to assume that, if you're looking at your water and sewer service areas, and now we have a long-range sewer service area that looks a little bit farther ahead than the state requires you to look, so that we can plan ahead a little bit more. So if you're looking at all of that, any of that could change, but if you're looking at based on where we are now, based on the zoning, like Daphne said, and based on what our water and sewer service areas are of the existing water and sewer plan, then you say, all right, so are there any of these constraints that are coming up for water supply or wastewater for we have 8 systems in the county that are, full municipal systems, both water and wastewater. Are any of these 8 systems coming up against with any of these limitations, right? So then you're going to look at that, and then you can change certain things based on those limitations, and some things can't be changed based on those limitations. So you can change your demand. You might be able to, put money towards something to address a limitation, but other limitations, it doesn't matter what money you've got, it's not going to, you can't change the cap that the federal government or the state government put on your plant, right? So the next slide, now let me just caveat, this is completely illustrative purposes only. This is not meant to be whether these individual systems have these issues or not, okay? But to give you an example, if you were looking at the systems and say you used red, yellow, green light, right? And green is, in this case, would be, all right, there aren't any issues, water, we've got enough water to accommodate the projected future growth for this system. Yellow could be, on here would represent, there's some issues, but it doesn't mean they're not insurmountable. You might be able to work around some of these limitations. And then perhaps red here is then, this is not a limitation that we're likely to be able to get around. So to give an example here on Freedom, we've got the majority of the water supply comes from Liberty Reservoir. And we've got ample amount of water through our agreement with Baltimore City to be able to accommodate the projected future growth for that area based again on that point in time. What was the zoning? What's our water sewer service areas, right? Based on that, we've got Freedom has ample water. So that's not going to be a constraint when you're looking at Freedom to see how much additional growth you want to be able to accommodate there. However, if you look at the wastewater plant, that could be more of a constraint. So I don't know how many of you know, but we do not own or operate the Freedom wastewater treatment plant. So there is a design capacity for that plant, and but we do not have the full plant capacity available to Carroll County. The state has a portion of that reserved for them. They own and operate. They own the system that's operated by Maryland Environmental Service. So the plant has capacity, but we don't have enough of that allocated to meet projected demand. So we're looking at that as yellow because we could potentially have conversations with the state to try to negotiate how much we have allocated from that plant. So
curiously, who would they allocate it to, if not us? I mean, what?
Well, the state currently has an allocation as part of that capacity reserved for themselves because of the development at Springfield and the whole state property there.
Okay, gotcha.
Just out of curiosity, and I know we've got 2 areas, Mount Airy and Westminster, neither that have any noted limitations, but Westminster's under a consent decree by MDE. I would consider that a limitation, would you not?
So, yeah, Westminster, we've got green here for a good reason. They used to be under consent agreement, but so one of the things that, when you're looking at what could be done is you might be thinking out of the box, right? So Westminster participated in a pilot project with the state for potable water reuse. And they are currently constructing a plant it's called Pure Water Westminster, where they are taking water from the wastewater treatment plant, treating it, and putting it into their reservoir. So it's cleaner than the water going into the reservoir. And then the water will be withdrawn from the reservoir at their at their water treatment plant and treated again. So that project, and the state's currently developing regulations for water reuse, that project has enabled them to have the water capacity that they need, so they won't have the problems that they had when they had the consent order.
But there's still, from all the conversations we've had of late on Westminster, and I have been in quite a few of those of late, that's still something that's in place formally with the state. And then the other thing is regarding the additional allocation. This allocation is not going to max out anytime soon. This is several years down the road at its earliest. So I'm just curious how they can both, it can be completely green with no limitations, because the water that's coming from the Pure Water Project will in part make up when they take the one location offline. So it's not putting in additional allocation above that threshold. They're trying to get back to that threshold.
Right, and I understand what you're saying, but remember, this is illustrative purposes only, isn't meant to be the
I was just
actual
curious, that's fine.
case.
I just want to make sure I understood, so no, I appreciate it.
Brenda, while we're on the water, before we get to the next phase of this, and I don't know if this makes any difference or not, but there were quite a few easements, agricultural land preservation easements, that were written with a water recharge allocation to Westminster and a few other municipalities. Is any of this taken, because we worked extensively with MDE to see if that would be recognized, if there were water allocation needs. Let's just take Westminster, because they were the first ones, and I'll take the farm that's located next to the Thomas Bennett and Hunter plant. That's a good example. There are a few deep wells on that farm. The farm's under easement, but the entire farm has a water recharge element in that easement that could be dedicated to the city of Westminster. Is that taken into consideration when you're talking about recharge areas, and does that make a difference? So, what I'm getting at is, is that a trend that we should be looking at as far as water allocation and the proximity to potential easements in the future? I don't know if they're still writing that into the easements or not on strategic farms, but was that taken into consideration by either the municipality or the county when you're looking at this?
So just, again, this is illustrative only,
I understand that.
but, so we're going to first look at this and say, all right, what's the demand? And do we have the capacity available, water supply and wastewater for each system, to accommodate what their current projected demand is? And then we identify, are there limitations? If they do, great, right? If they don't, then what are the limitations, and can those limitations be overcome?
Yeah, they
So
were
water
there were
recharge
percentages.
easements.
Yeah, there were
Yes.
percentages written into these easements that could be allocated and still allow that landowner to have enough water to operate that farm under certain limitations.
Yes.
So I just
And we
wanted to
have
bring
used
that up
that,
because
yes.
there was a lot of work put into that, from water resource upstairs and many trips down to MDE working through this. And I just was putting that into the conversation because it's real.
Yeah, it is
wanna know how-
something we are still doing. And if a system comes up against a capacity allocation issue, then that is a tool that we have available in order to help them get that allocation.
So
So,
do you
yes.
track that in the planning department, how many acres are available? I mean, it should be in the Ag Preservation Office, and the planning should have those figures also, because it amounts to a fair amount of acres.
Right, so AgPres has that information available, as does our groundwater hydrogeologist. So, yeah, we are tracking that information, and we know what we've got
The idea
available.
behind that was to help push clustering in and maybe the density's up, which we talked about here today. And so that there was a reason behind all this. Just wanted to lay that on the table.
Thanks, Ralph.
So as we're going through these, you see like some of these might be yellow and it says additional water needed. Well, that's based on this point in time where we looked at the zoning and the water and sewer service areas. They might need additional water in order to meet that. That doesn't mean it's a limitation that can't be overcome. They just need to find more water supply. And in some cases, these water charge easements are a tool available to us to help that, to overcome the limitation. So that's just one tool, and we look at multiple tools once we see whether or not we need to be able to serve or find more water. In the past, sometimes the municipalities have actually pulled in their growth area boundaries because of the limitations that were there. Now we're closer to where they should be, but before we were required to look at this as part of the comprehensive planning process, some of them, like Hampstead, for example, had a growth area that was way bigger than they could possibly serve with water. And so they shrunk their boundary in, and now it's more reflective of, it's more balanced at this point. So for each of these, we're going to look at this and we're going to say, they need more water. Can we get more water? What's the limitation? Can it be overcome? And the same with the wastewater. Some of these aren't going to be able to go any bigger on their wastewater capacity because of these bay caps. So for example, Hampstead, they have design capacity is at 0.9 MGD, 900,000 gallons per day. And their bay cap for total phosphorus is also 900,000. So they're not going to be able, and they can expand there. So they're not going to be able to accommodate any additional growth in terms of their wastewater plant. Others, like Mount Airy, their cap and their projected growth are under what their current design capacity is. So, that one's looking better. Union Bridge, not saying right now the plant can't handle the projected growth, but it's not saying a new plant couldn't be built, because it could be, but that's just that's a money issue. So, that's a limitation that could be overcome if somebody wants to pay for a new plant for them. That's a big deal, but just it's an example of showing like certain things are money issues and other things are policy or regulations that we cannot overcome that limitation. So, and I'm not going to go through each individual thing any more than that, but it gives you a general idea of hopefully the kinds of things that we need to consider and whether or not each individual growth area is going to be able to take on additional growth beyond what they've, maybe even based on what they already have, they might need to pull something in, or can they take on more in the future based on what the limitations are and whether they can be overcome.
And so, thank you, Brenda. As Brenda was sort of alluding to there, the reason why understanding this information is important is because we look back at some of the conversations we've just recently had about directing growth into our designated growth areas, and working with the municipalities to be able to do that sort of thing. And so this starts to fill in some of the picture about what might be involved in terms of those discussions. So a lot of municipalities have, as Brenda said, kind of pulled in their growth area boundary because in this case, the water and sewer or sewer capacity is driving that planning. Are there opportunities to work with the municipalities and the state probably in trying to overcome those limitations? There may be. In other places, there may not. But I just wanted to kind of take this time to plant these seeds in your brains. So as we're thinking about what growth in the county could look like it's not just an open, an open free-for-all, and we can work to expand growth areas or do this or do that. These are some of the limitations that we'll need to be aware of as we go into those kinds of conversations.
Daphne, one question on sewer. A large tract of land, a developer comes along and says, all right, there's limited potential here. What if I build a treatment plant? Is that something the state would look at?
Yeah, definitely. That is an option, whether they're constructing a new plant or they're paying money towards one or doing some very targeted mitigation kinds of things. Those are all options that are out there. Some of it will probably depend on what the improvements are and whether that's something that an individual developer can be responsible for, or if it's something that needs to be part of kind of a larger package. Because sometimes the limitations don't operate in isolation.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, just sort of generally on water and wastewater capacity and demand?
Does the health department allow a common septic area for, say, a 4 or 5 lot development that would have one common septic area? Is that allowed in a county?
Like
I know
a
it is in
community,
some other county. In other words, if you have a 3-lot development clustered, and the only perk area could be a common septic area for the 3 lots, is that allowed?
I believe it is. It's usually like a community septic.
It would be like a homeowners association type
Yeah.
deal.
It's a business.
I just was wondering, is that allowed in the county, in this county? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else.
I know that the state law does provide for those systems, but how much authority the individual county health departments have or don't have over that, I just haven't run into that.
I guess that's my question,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I will say, often lenders aren't
They don't like
big
it.
on it. They like, nope. So,
And that's a good idea.
There's a reason for that.
But I know there are counties that have tried that, and
Right.
they fail miserably, usually.
yeah.
It's kind of like flag lots and using common driveways.
Yeah.
Any
I
good
just
lawyer
was-
would say, don't
I just
buy
was
one.
wondering if there was
Lenders
any.
do allow that.
They allow it, but
Yeah,
they
they allow
shouldn't as much. So,
Yeah.
My recommendation is, don't do it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so something to keep in the back of your minds as we go through these discussions, and we're certainly happy to dig into this a little bit more, which you'll have the opportunity because a
More
lot of
than you'll
this
ever
data
want to.
was coming from the preliminary results for the water resources element, which Brenda will bring to you in the coming months, right? Yeah.
Probably in the winter.
Okay. Moving on then, let's talk about the buildable land inventory. So I think at one point during one of our work sessions, somebody had asked a question of whether we have a handle on how many lots are possible to be developed, that sort of thing. And we definitely have that information. They are estimates, so I'm just going to start this whole part of this presentation by emphasizing these are estimates, and they work actually in a range. So we have low, medium, and high estimates. But This is something that we've been doing since 2005. In 2005, we did the first buildable land inventory report. That report was updated in 2012. And since 2012, we've been running these calculations on an annual basis, and you see them every year as part of the planning annual report. So on the right-hand side, you'll see page 26 from the most recently approved planning annual report that has some of the tables that you'll see a little further in the presentation. And also, I should note, I will provide you with an electronic copy of the presentation. Okay, so basically what the buildable land inventory is we run all kinds of calculations based on specific property constraints and their current built condition to estimate how many additional residential and/or commercial or industrial lots and development could be accommodated there. So this gives us a sense of what our potential is. So I just want to walk you through what that calculation process is, and then give you a set of numbers to refer to, again, as we look forward to the discussions in the master plan. So first on the calculation, the first thing we do is identify what constraints are on the property that are going to naturally limit what development potential there is. So you'll see on the screen now the constraints that are applied for the residential calculations only. So there are a few things that are absolute constraints. In other words, it's going to take that entire property out of the calculation. So that would be anything with that are publicly owned lands, anything with an ag pres easement on it, any ag remaining portions that don't have further subdivision rights, road rights of way, open space, quarries, public use, and other non-buildable parcels. Then we have partial constraints that are taken off the property. This may not be for the entire property, but that's going to be areas where you have streams and required stream buffers, 100-year floodplains, basically all the environmental constraints that we regulate for, as well as things like communication towers. So the process to calculate the residential development potential is to identify those constraints and take them off, subtract them out from the parcel area that could be used to calculate development potential. Then that parcel data is related to the zoning. So I just want to make note here. This is based on existing zoning. So if everything that could be developed was developed tomorrow under current zoning, that's what that calculation is. It does not look at what we've got planned. So in other words, in a particular growth area, there might be land that's currently zoned agriculture, but it's planned to be zoned in the future for some type of residential development. That's a difference in the potential in the development potential there, the potential lot yield off that property. So we would only be calculating on the existing zoning, not future land use. Okay, so we take the constraints off. We relate that parcel data with the zoning and identify which parcels would be used to calculate the residential buildable land inventory. We are now including commercial and employment campus zoned land because recent changes to the zoning ordinance allow for some residential development in those zones. Then we apply some multipliers to each zoning designation to to identify what the potential lot yield might be. And those multipliers are based on our historical averages of what lot yield has been in different zones. Just a little note here that anything that's outside of a water and sewer service area, we will cap at that 7-lot maximum in response to HB 236. So you might have a property that otherwise would have been calculated out for, I don't know, 10, 15 lots, something like that. But we put that 7-lot cap there because of the limitations that HB 236 puts on it. Last step is to then identify if any of those parcels are improved or have some other type of development already on them that would alter what that potential lot yield might be. We do this for both county properties and for municipal properties. So it's the same steps, but maybe different multipliers or slightly different calculations based on their zoning in the municipalities as opposed to county zoning. All right, so this gives us, we'll do this 3 different times. We do a low, medium, and a high estimate on residential. And then for commercial, it's just slightly different. The constraints are different on commercial and industrial. So it's really just limited to floodplains, wetlands, and impervious areas, which denotes that it's already got a certain amount of development on it. So again, we're relating the parcel data with the zoning and identifying which parcels would be used to calculate that commercial and industrial BLI. And we'll take the constraints out of the parcel data and then go through a process to identify anything that's already improved versus vacant. And that's really kind of a parcel by parcel analysis to see which developed parcels are not really capable of taking on additional development. And then we'll look at what that resulting potential is on commercial and industrial lands. And again, we do this for both county and municipalities. Any questions on our process before we start looking at some numbers quickly? Okay. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of detail on or time on these numbers. You can kind of digest them on your own time, but I did want to be able to provide some numbers as part of this presentation. So when we're looking at the potential residential lots in our growth areas, this chart gives you a sense of what we're talking about. We've split it out by PFA or priority funding area and MGA, which stands for municipal growth area, and DGA, which stands for designated growth area. So basically, our priority funding areas are sometimes a little bit smaller than our designated growth areas. So this just gives you a sense of what that difference is, and then what we're talking about in terms of total numbers. And you can see some of the ways that those numbers are allocated between those areas. So within our designated growth areas as a whole, we're looking at about 8,700 lots, and this is the medium range. So there could be a lower range or a lower number, there could be a higher number. This is kind of right in the middle there.
Daphne, on that, how, the low, medium, high, they're obviously lower, there's some expectation or part of a formula that says, it's not going to happen because of prior experience. This has happened with what we've seen in this area, How do you get the low, medium, high grades?
Sandy, do you want to, what are some of the things that really affect the difference between low, medium, and high? This is Sandy Baber. She's with our GIS division.
I'm not the best person to answer for residential. I do the non-residential portion of the buildable land. Mike Roberts does the residential. But we do take different factors into it. Like Daphne was saying earlier, the different constraints, the partial constraints come into play with that. It's almost like the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. So that's, and then in the middle, it kind of is the middle ground. So that's how we do the low and the high, and track, because we've been doing this for 20 years now, we can kind of look at our numbers and see how trends go, and the medium is basically where we usually are falling on average. So we feel very confident with that. Most of the time, the low and the high get pushed out, and we don't even use
It's
those.
like a bell curve kind of thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, for instance, you could get, well, some of the things that you've had before you recently include things like age-restricted housing. So that's obviously going to be a higher yield than what we would have calculated for that particular parcel, because it's just got other potential. You may also have somebody that chooses to do some different kind. I suppose there may be a scenario where somebody would choose to do larger lots or lower density than what they could, under other circumstances, achieve on that property. But so we just never know exactly what's going to come through, or really what somebody might find during the development process that creates a limitation that that we can't anticipate just based on these constraints that we've already identified. So that's why you want to have a little bit of a range. It's not a solid number. Anything could come up to shift it one way or another. Okay, so still sticking on residential here, you've got two other tables that that look then at those numbers that are possible within our designated growth areas, and then compare that to what's possible outside of those areas. So you'll see that that our existing, on the top table, table 21, based on existing zoning, we've got a little bit more in terms of potential lots that are possible outside of our designated growth areas than inside, but it's almost 50-50. The table below that then gives you a little bit more information relative to the lots that are already on the ground. So you'll see the existing units that we have are 66,622. There's the potential for just under 20,000 additional units. And then you can see how that breaks out in terms of inside versus outside our designated growth areas. I think it's a good thing that we're over 50% of total potential units inside our designated growth areas. And you'll see on the map on the next slide where those potential units are. It's a little hard at this scale to pick up on, but you do see in and around our municipalities and the Freedom area, there are some clusters of red dots that show up a little bit more solid, that suggest where there is potential for additional development within our growth areas. A lot of the remaining red dots that you see there, which are the potential residential lots, they're real scattered. They're not concentrated any one particular area. And those really are, whether those ever come to fruition is completely up for grabs. You know, a lot of that depends on whether somebody chooses to develop their land, whether it can be developed, and then what some of the other incentives are. So I'll just point out that if you look at that little sort of crescent area between Taunting Town, Union Bridge, and New Windsor, you see that there are fewer red dots in that area, and that's primarily due to the fact that that's one of our designated priority preservation areas. So there's a whole lot of land preservation that has occurred there, as well as the area between Westminster and Manchester and Hampstead.
Daphne, I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's why we should really be looking into the strategy moving forward on ag preservation. I think that's yet to be discussed and yet to be determined. But I think it's very important moving forward, based on this inventory that we're looking at, that we take a real hard approach on the strategy. And a lot of it's, of course, based on the dollars and cents of it too. What can the county afford and the state afford, and then what is most effective for all the above. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we look at that. That is really, I'm glad you brought that up.
I totally agree. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna, one other observation about where we are. And, you know, if you had just said, Daphne, you know, rank the areas of growth or where there's the most potential, you know, I would have put Freedom and Westminster 1 or 2 or 1. But I would have, for the life of me, I would have put Mount Airy third. And it's shocking to me because of its proximity to I-70. It's shocking to me that there's not more red down there.
Right.
So that's a point of information. It's not saying, I'm not saying, you know, something should happen. I'm just saying that's an interesting, because again, it's just, you know, these are your plotting points, but it's the visual thing and the numbers are great when you put them together. Thank you.
I think Mount Airy encompasses Frederick County, Montgomery County, and some of Howard, so.
Yeah, that's right.
That's.
But the numbers on here are only Carroll County. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
no,
so-
I know
yeah, yeah.
that.
Yes, that's cool.
But if you
Yeah.
look at the geographic
Yeah,
area.
yeah. I hear you.
and
I hear you.
It's
It's a
also
difficult
pretty
area
built up
because
out there.
of the you know, what is Mount Airy?
Exactly.
Is it Frederick or is it Carroll?
As it wants to be.
And so there's been an awful lot of pushback on both directions there, and that's been a tough one to solve.
But it's great stuff, so thank you.
On the non-residential potential side of things, you have some of the same types of charts here. This is by acreage as opposed to individual lots. So you can see where there are where there's some higher numbers, and this is again within the priority funding areas and designated growth areas. But then I'll just call your attention to the line on the bottom there, or the two lines on the bottom above the total. So total inside and total outside is the acreage inside the priority funding areas or designated growth areas, and the total outside. So we have a fair amount of potential inside our designated growth areas, and pretty low acreages outside. And this table gives you, again, some of the same information you saw on the residential, compares the, what we've got existing to what we've got on the potential side of things, and the total acreage, and then a little bit of a breakdown in terms of where those acres are located. And then here's the map to go along with that. You'll see again, a lot of that, as the chart showed, a lot of the potential acreage is located in and around our designated growth areas municipalities. Just a note about the annual updates. So as I mentioned, this is something that's done every year. It's calculated by our Division of GIS. And they're always kind of looking at those constraint layers and seeing if there's anything that needs to be changed. Maybe there's new state legislation or even updates on things like areas that have been developed in the past year or rezoned or anything like that. We'll also account for anything that has been taken out of development potential as a result of entering into an ag preservation easement. And there are lots of ways that we can use these numbers. My hope is that we'll look at them just as reference points for our conversations about growth in the county, where we want it, where we don't want it, what our potential is, and maybe where there are some opportunities to shift the balance if that's something that you want to see. But we also use these to help us calculate our population projections, do the water and sewer projections, those kinds of things. So this is a really important tool that we have. A lot of work goes into it. We've been refining this for close to 20 years, and it's a tool that we have at our disposal. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew about it, that you know that we can rely on that as we go forward with our master plan discussions. And if there are other ways that you want to see some of this information, please let us know and we can try to pull that together, help you with visualizations or do some deep dives as you want. Any questions on the BLI that we haven't touched on yet?
I think it was very well presented, put together. Certainly appreciate all the information, and hopefully we understand it as we move forward.
As I said before, it's a lot of information to kind of assimilate. So we wanted to just introduce it to you, give you some things to work with initially. And certainly if there are any just sort of off the bat observations that you have based on what you've heard here today that you want to share before we close the meeting, then happy to hear those and take note of those for future discussions.
I would say, like, the one thing that Ralph said about the recharge areas, definitely want to hear more about that, because I know, I think I have one property that has that water recharge area on it that's an ag pres. That was supposed to be designated for New Windsor, and then I heard MDE decided that maybe they weren't going to count that, even though it's right beside the ground they have. And then
They approved it.
Did they finally?
MDE.
Yeah.
But I don't know,
What you
things have
wonder.
changed,
Yeah, well.
We
it's
don't
all-
know what things are doing now, that's why.
And then the other thing is Commissioner Gordon said something about watching the link to the solar thing. Can someone send us that link, just to make it easy? So we can just watch that portion of it instead of scanning through everything to
Sure.
look at that?
I appreciate you both mentioning the recharge, because I do think that's important we look at that.
Is there a way to overlay the ag pres onto this
Sure.
kind of master map, just to
That would
visualize that?
be very helpful.
Yeah.
And the other piece, I guess, is the commercial industrial. I know it's probably a small, it might just deserve a blank map. Commercial, industrial dots.
Man, that's brutal.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry at that comment, but, you know.
I'm just trying to figure that out.
It's food for thought for.
Yeah.
It's
so
something.
It is important.
It's something.
So what, you wanted a separate commercial and industrial map showing, so we do have that in here. Where'd my cursor go? That's the potential non-residential development. They are
Oh, yeah.
There it is.
purple areas that may not be as easy to discern.
Okay.
So, but you're going to send
I missed it, I'm
this to
sorry.
us, correct?
Yeah,
So we can
Yep.
make it bigger and. see it
absolutely,
better.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, there you go.